video lectures on Bourdieu, and we have talked about him. I did spend a good portion of a previous lecture talking about him. We haven't read from him before, but a lot of the stuff on cultural production reception is really related to him, so I talked about him before. Bourdieu is, I think, like I said in the previous lecture on him, probably the most important theorist in the last 20 years about doing sociology. He's not alive anymore, but he died just recently in the last decade or so. And he's an example of grand theory. Well, and I guess I want to preface what I just said, that actually a lot of people, it's highly controversial what I just said, because a lot of people actually don't like Bourdieu. They think he's too theoretical and too, not empirical enough. And but I think that in terms of sociological theory, he's the most important person to engage with, especially when it comes to sociology of culture. So most people, sociologists who are sociologists of culture, are all highly influenced by Bourdieu. But like I said, there's a lot of people in sociology that don't think we should be paying any attention to Bourdieu. But in this class, he's kind of held up as someone pretty important. But grand theory is just the idea of overall social theory. And some people think that grand theory is a waste of time. I think we should be explaining particulars instead of, more general, grand, that fully incorporates all aspects of social life. And that's what Bourdieu is. When we talked about him before, we talked about fields, the concepts of fields, habitus, and forms of capital. So I don't know, just to review that really briefly, fields is like a social field, is analogous to a playing field where you have actors in particular positions and they're following particular rules, and there's outcomes to the game that they're playing that are desirable, and they all kind of have to be willing to participate according to the rules of the playing field. And so that's thinking about, the context in which action takes place. Habitus, if you remember, hopefully, is these deeply instilled dispositions that we have. I mean, it's obviously related to the word habits, but just ways of thinking that are it's kind of like Swidler's toolkits of things in our beliefs that we draw on. But for Bourdieu, that it's much more deep than that. So Swidler talks more about people accessing discourses like popular ideas in the way they justify their action. But for Bourdieu, it doesn't even have to be something that people could talk about. It's like beliefs that are so deeply instilled, sometimes we don't even recognize them and how they affect us. And then forms of capital, the two most important are economic capital, which that's kind of obvious. It's just money, like people in society who have power because of their economic well-being. But then cultural capital is this other really important concept that I talked about before. It's basically like any kind of degree, like if you have a master's or something, that's a form of cultural capital. So there's that, it's like explicit, but there's also, we talked about how like knowledge of music or something within certain circles, within certain social circles, you're held in high esteem if you have a high amount of knowledge. Like for example, within religion, like if you're in a religious congregation, you have a lot of knowledge about the norms and the rituals, stuff like that. All these can be sources of cultural capital where you do get power in a social context, but it doesn't come from money. It comes from some sort of cultural knowledge or designation, like a degree. Okay, enough about that. That's just the review. But now talking about this chapter specifically, I mean, one of the quiz questions and one of the things that Swartz talks about a lot in this chapter is Bourdieu's relationship to Marx. And I think that Bourdieu can be thought of as a lot of the things that people are critical about Marx and Marxism, like a lot of things where Marxist theory sort of falls apart. Bourdieu tries to pick those things up and make them better and improve upon them. So I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, about some of the key concepts that are different between Marx and Bourdieu. Bourdieu and Weber, I wish that I could have spent more time on Weber. So we haven't really done any writings thinking about Weber's theories of culture. But I guess the important point is that Bourdieu's whole theory of symbolic power and these forms of capital that people can have, especially cultural capital, is basically being generalized from Weber's theory of in the sociology of religion. We talked about this in the first couple classes. I mean, the first couple weeks, just Weber's theory of charismatic authority, and charismatic authority being this source of change in society, because it opposes the charismatic authority is the person who, can kind of see the problems with society, like a prophet, okay, in the classic religion sense, but it doesn't have to be a prophet in modern sense. It could be like just a Steve Jobs, or people who have a vision that inspires people, that then creates change, and leaders of social movements like Martin Luther King, people like that. And there is this dynamics that work that has to do with actors, so actors with a habitus, acting within a field, a social field, and the dynamics of that have a regularity that a social scientist should be able to analyze, okay? And that's kind of the important thing that Bourdieu takes from Weber, is that his whole theory about symbolic capital and changing in society is really based on Weber. Okay. Some other key concepts besides fields, habitus, and capital. Symbolic violence. I mean, this is a quiz question too. It's basically anything where a symbolic system, so think about Geertz and Swidler, who we talked a lot about. They talk about symbol systems and the way people use symbol systems to inform their action. Any kind of symbol system that perpetuates these distinctions and differences between people is used to reproduce inequality. And so some examples is probably the easiest way to understand it, is like long-held ideas about gender differences or race differences, okay? So like, say, before women could vote, there was this set of beliefs about, reasons why women weren't capable of voting. They aren't as rational, or something like that. Anything like that that's like part of our belief system, that's part of culture, that then creates these differences between people that seem natural. So the idea was like women are just naturally not as rational, and so therefore they aren't given the right to vote. Okay, something like that. That's an example of symbolic violence, or similar ideas about racial differences. When these distinctions are kind of believed to be natural, so the bullet point is when inequality becomes naturalized, those are the key examples of symbolic violence for Bourdieu. And related to symbolic violence is this idea of misrecognition. And so those two things go hand in hand, of course, because like with the gender example in voting, the differences that people believed between men and women that were the basis for denying women the right to vote, those were misrecognized in Bourdieu's terms. Those differences were misrecognized as natural. Okay, so the symbolic violence is only perpetuated when it's misrecognized. And then another example of misrecognition is when people are in denial of their interestedness in a social outcome. Okay, so like men were obviously empowered by denying women the right to vote, okay, but people would say, oh, well, that's not because, it's not because we want to be empowered more, it's just because there are these natural differences. So they're misrecognizing the ways that they're empowered by these symbolic systems that perpetuate symbolic violence, okay? And then another related concept is this amor fati, and what that means is, that's just obviously the Latin for love your fate, but the reason why this is an important concept for Bourdieu, because he thinks about, think about, for example, a person from a working class background that's raised without much education, and their set of possibilities, so like the things that they could become in their life is limited according to their social standing. Their education possibilities are limited, but what you see with those actors is embracing that sort of lot in life, and embracing it as desirable, and like kind of, because it would be, it's like Marx was one of the critiques of Marx is that everybody thought, oh, why doesn't the working class just rise up and have this Marxist revolution like Marx thought would happen? And Marx's explanation is that they had this false consciousness, which is similar to the Bourdieu concept of misrecognition, except for the Bourdieu concept is more, I think, respectful of the actor, because it's kind of disrespectful to say, oh, you just have false consciousness, that's why you have your beliefs. But Bourdieu acknowledges the experience of the actor that would be, that would inform their choice to act in particular ways, but he still claims it might be misrecognized. They might be misrecognizing some or all of their interests in doing that. Anyway, and that relates to amor fati, because when dominated groups, like either racially or gender or class, that are basically oppressed by the symbol systems, the belief systems of society, when they don't, collectively act to change that system that is dominating them, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they embrace their faith. They have this amor fati. And an example of amor fati would be like, think about hip-hop culture. Think about like rap lyrics that embrace, I don't know if it's usually not necessarily reality for some of these actors, but lyrics that embrace like a life of violence or a life of embracing there are facts about African American males in inner cities and in poor neighborhoods, and the likelihood of them not making it to 25 without being put in jail or worse, or dying or something like that. And so you see this embracing that life as is a perfect example of amor fati, and that embracement is reflected in some of the cultural expressions of hip hop art and culture. So there are other examples as well, but I want to end this, and hopefully that's enough. I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about Bourdieu in the coming weeks as we. There's 1 week where there's no assigned readings, so maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that and hopefully get some of these concepts, because it's really difficult. So if you struggled with this, don't worry about it. Just try to get a couple of ideas down, and you can feel satisfied with that. But okay, hopefully that's good. Thank you.